Ouch.
Uh-oh.
After suffering a lifetime of abuse at the hands of her alcoholic mother, Umbria's only relief came in the wee hours of the morning after the woman fell asleep or passed out. It was during one of these rare, quiet nights that Umbria was surprised by a soft knock at the front door. It was a scared young girl, about 6 years old, with brown eyes and blonde hair. Her frail, pale body shivered in the cold. Umbria took in the tiny visitor and offered her a warm blanket, though it didn't seem to make her any warmer. She asked the girl what her name was. Before the girl finally answered, Umbria realized that her eyes were not brown, but pure black.
Lacy Morgan.
Umbria made a bed for the girl on the living room couch, keeping watch on her to assure she could sleep comfortably. But she never saw Lacy fall asleep. Instead, she herself drifted out of consciousness while watching over her. The next morning, Umbria was rudely awakened by a harsh smack from her mother, who was raging about the mess in the living room and everything else. Umbria looked over at the couch, and she saw that Lacy was gone. But the blankets, pillow, and couch were smeared with mud and dirt. The next day, Umbria heard a conversation between classmates in which they spoke the name Lacy Morgan. Listening closer, she heard them talking about a young girl by that name who was found dead the previous night. And that evening, a news report confirmed it.
Tonight, the body of Lacy was found buried on the property of her mother, Marissa Morgan, who was previously reported missing and a primary suspect in the child's death.
The broadcast included the last known photo of the girl, who was nearly identical to the child who appeared at Umbria's door the night before. The only difference was the color of her eyes. In the photo, the irises were not black, but pure blue. Absolutely terrified, Umbria huddled in her bed that night, unable to sleep until well after midnight. Whereupon, she was awakened by a cold hand coming to brush her face, caressing the spot where her mother had struck her the day before.
Never again,
whispered a tiny voice. Umbria flinched away, turning reflexively toward the sound, but there was no one there. For several minutes she shivered in terror, until she heard the sound of her mother's shrill, tortured screams from down the hallway. From sheer terror to cries of agony. The teenager finally mustered up enough courage to creep to her mother's room, and while she was deeply horrified by what she would find there, there was a small part of her that already knew what she would see. The girl who called herself Lacey Morgan was straddling the woman's mangled body, her tiny hands embedded deeply in the torn, ragged flesh, her face and arms stained in fresh blood. The girl suddenly sat up, spat out a chunk of the dead woman's face, and turned to look at Umbria, staring intently at her, and finally smiling through a mouthful of blood. It was the last thing Umbria remembered before losing consciousness. Umbria woke up in her own bed the next morning. She then went to her mother's room, assuming she had just had a horrible nightmare. Surprisingly, the bed was empty, but also very clean and tidy, as if it hadn't been slept in for days. That's when she noticed the footprints, dirty smudges from a small child's bare feet, leading from the edge of the bed to the open window. These incidents happened many years ago, and Umbria's mother's disappearance was never solved. And now that she is grown, she is married with a daughter of her own. She has never seen the apparition of Lacey Morgan again, and she certainly hopes that her daughter never does.